Ladies and gentlemen, dear students of the Festival University, today we expect another highlight of our Festival University. We are going to listen to one of the real pioneers of environmental sciences. His voice, his publications have a deep impact on global scientific community and on politicians around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, please welcome together with me Professor Ernst Ulrich Weizsäcker. Dear Professor Weizsäcker, it is a great honor and a great pleasure to have you here for the first time at Johannes Kepler University. Please allow me a few words about our university. We are teaching 23,000 students divided in 4 faculties: a law faculty, a faculty for social sciences and economics, a faculty for natural sciences, and engineering, and last but not least, our baby faculty is the medical faculty. And above all, we have created an Institute for Technology, the Linz Institute for Technology, and it is a very comprehensive institute. We regard all subjects of our university as part of this technological institute. Having said that, we are very happy to profit today from your broad expertise, from your broad experience, and we are happy to have Mr. Kellerhoff here. He's the head of the program of the Club of Rome, and he heads the Earth4All initiative within the Club of Rome, and we are very excited to hear his introduction. And now allow me to pass to Horst Hörtner, the head of the outstanding Future Lab of Ars Electronica. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome to the afternoon sessions of the Ars Electronica Future Lab Day. My name is Horst Hörtner. I'm founding member of the Ars Electronica Future Lab and directing it since then. And today I'm the stage host, so to speak, of this afternoon sessions, which the Future Lab Day and this afternoon from the morning session to the late night session in the deep space in the Ars Electronica Center have been curated by the Ars Electronica Future Lab and the festival team together. This afternoon session will be 2 programmatic blocks, I would say. First, for sure, most important, the block Earth4All. Earth4All, survival guide for humanity, has been just recently made publicly accessible by the Club of Rome. We will get a deep dive into the structures on that survival guide, on a panel discussion. Again, members of the Club of Rome will explain and talk about this really very important document and report and research report. The second part will then be addressed to you all. It's about work of the future, and it's about being an open audience discussion. It's less listening to somebody, it's more speaking out to everybody. This is what we plan starting at 4 o'clock. Now, I do have the honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker. But before he will join the stage, there's also Till Kellerhoff coming on stage, as already introduced as the program director of the Club of Rome. Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, as Meinrad Olli described, isn't really needed to be introduced, but it's such a pleasure to read through these impressive stations. And I want to give you also the chance again to enjoy this pleasure. Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, born in 1939, married and 5 children, is professor of biology at the University of Essen. He's been president of the University of Kassel, director at UN Center for Science in New York, director of the Institute for European Environmental Policy, chairman of the Environment Committee in the Parliament, president of Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy, and dean of the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management at the University of California in Santa Barbara. And, of course, co-president of the Club of Rome from 2012 to 2018. But before we will have this honor to hear your keynote, we would like to welcome the program director and of the Club of Rome and the manager of the Earth4All initiative, Till Kellerhoff, on stage. His work focuses on issues and theories related to the conditions of an economic system that can generate prosperity for a majority rather than a small elite within the boundaries, the planetary boundaries of our planet. He studied political science and international relations with a focus on international political economy at the University of Erfurt, the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, and London School of Economics. Please, a warm welcome to Till Kellerhoff.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organization and the invitation. And I'm pleased to say a few words on this new report to the Club of Rome, Earth4All, which just came out 3 days ago, before we have the pleasure to listening to Ernst von Weizsäcker. So, Earth4All, actually the real starting point of Earth4All is 50 years ago. 50 years ago, a group of people, a group of researchers came together to try to look a little bit into the future. This attempt is always difficult. We know that history is full of wrong attempts to look into the future. We know that Gottfried Daimler, one of the pioneers in car industry, said in the year 1901 that the world market for cars will never exceed 1 million. We know that the former president of IBM in 1940 said that he doesn't expect more personal computers than 5 in the world, because there won't be the demand for that. So we know predictions are tricky, and so this is not what the authors and researchers behind Limits to Growth did. What the team tried to do is to look at different scenarios on how the world would develop if we follow certain trends. Scenarios are not predictions. Scenarios are possible futures and look into what could happen if humanity behaved that way or that way. What we see here is what became known as the business as usual scenario. And the main message of the Limits to Growth 50 years ago was that unlimited material consumption on a finite planet is not possible. We have seen that more or less the business as usual scenario was followed by what we see in the world economy. We see that by various ways. We see that today we would need 1.7 planets to actually have a sustainable consumption of our materials. And of course, even more if we looked at the economic system of our rich world, which is of course the main problem. We also see that we are exceeding and transgressing planetary boundaries, as you can see here on the left side. And at the same time, we see that this exploitation of Earth and the constant extraction and overconsumption we see does not necessarily lead to higher well-being for all people on Earth. We see that as part of our Earth4All analysis, that well-being actually at the moment, due to different factors, decreases in global average. And what we try to do is relate these ecological factors, as you see them on the left, and the social factors, as you see them on the right, and you will hear more about that later, also by co-author Jayati Ghosh. But why is it so important to look at the inequality factor and the social factor and the ecological factor together? What we see here is a material footprint. according to different incomes. And while we see that high income groups consume as much as 27 tons per person per year, and we see that for low income people that's way less, and even that the increases in the last 10-15 years have been very different. So we know that the richest billion people on Earth actually is responsible for 72% of the resource consumptions, while the consequences of issues such as climate change, droughts, food scarcity, etc., will have to be bared by the group you see here on the left, which is not necessarily responsible. So what we thought in Earth4All is that it's time for a new economic model that prioritizes the health and well-being of people and planet instead of growth at all costs. But this is a normative statement which is easy to take. Everyone says, yeah, sure, we want fairness, we want a better world, we want education, we want economic stability, we want ecological stability on the Earth, but how do we actually do that? And what we did then in the Earth4All project since 2 years is to work together with a group of over 30 economists from across the world, with researchers, climate scientists from different institutions, from the Potsdam Institute, from the Stockholm Resilience Center, from the Norwegian Business School, and base this work on 2 pillars. One is a system dynamic model, similar to the limits to growth, that looks at the interrelationships of the social and economic factors and can ask questions such as what happens if inequality is increased or decreased, what does that have to do with climate protection? But we know that all models are wrong, some are useful, and that's why we worked with a group of 30 economists to stress test the assumptions that go into the model and the interpretation that comes out of the model. So a model alone is never useful. It's just numbers, it's quantification. But what we want to create is a narrative that is appealing and that shows the main transformations necessary at this point in time to actually achieve something like a stable system for all within planetary boundaries. And in that context, we came up with these 5 turnarounds. These 5 turnarounds, again, as you see, are a connection of social and environmental factors. It's energy, it's food, it's inequality, it's poverty, and it's empowerment. Because all of these factors actually belong together. We know that today the food production is one of the main drivers of climate change. We know that, for example, 80% of the land mass used for food production goes into farming for animals, while these only provide 18% of the calories for humanity on Earth. So we see perversities in all these issues, but we also know that without addressing the inequality aspect, and Jayati will say more about that, we won't be able to succeed. So maybe just one last point on the plans and what we have done there. We know that the transformation is needed in the different sectors, and we describe this in great detail in the book, and I can't go into detail here now. But what we also know is that if these transformations are applied, this will be disruptive. There will be losers, there will be winners. The majority of the people, what we see in our well-being index, will be winners, but we know that short-term there will be losers. And we know that we need kind of a role of an active state. We know that markets alone won't fix that, and we need compensation for those who will be the losers, which we see even more at the moment in the current crisis we're having. So I encourage you to have a look at that, these different turnarounds and policy solutions for each of them. I just want to pick out one, which is for the inequality turnaround, where we suggest a concept which is called universal basic dividend, which is similar to what the Alaska Permanent Fund at the moment does, or taking the wins and gains that come out of the extraction of Earth, from fossil fuel industry, from oil extraction, etc., into a common fund for all citizens. And similar to a universal basic income, this is then being distributed across different citizens to also show that the global commons belong to all of us and not a small minority. But what Earth4All also, learning from the limits to growth, did is to say we don't want to just publish a book and then let's see what happens, and then we see in 50 years we speak about the misinterpretations again, where people again said, oh, we have another doomsday scenario and the apocalypse is coming. This is not, first of all, not what Earth4All is saying, but second of all, we also want to create a movement out of it. We want to have people on board, we want to work with people, we want to see best practices on the ground and create something like a movement to actually achieve this together as a democratic bottom-up initiative, while at the same time pushing governments to act. And I know you're keen on hearing more from Ernst von Weizsäcker, that's why I will stop now, but encourage you to have a look at the book, and thank you for the attention.
Dear Director of the University, dear Mr. Heltner, and dear Till, and dear present people listening. It's not an easy thing to talk about the problems that we are facing now, and I know, of course, that the Club of Rome has done its best in doing this Earth for All. I shall also use one or two of those pictures which Till has been showing, and I'm trying to work down on creative resilience for a planet B, especially on climate. The Club of Rome, as you know, has written that famous book, The Limits to Growth, and it was a world bestseller. And you would, of course, assume it was impressive to the world. Has it reduced the speed of growth? No. We saw a tenfold GDP increase within 25 years after 1972. Nobody listened. Why? Because people simply hate limits to growth. That was the problem that made it famous, of course. Well, if 8 billion people have ecological footprints like the US Americans, the miracle people on Earth, we would not need 6 planets Earth, but we have got only one. The usual pretext for endless growth is we have to eradicate poverty. Can't you understand that? There are so poor people in the world. Well, what was it? In 1820, nearly all people were poor. In 1970, 2 years before the book came out, it was still a majority, but today it is only roughly 12% or so. So it's a pretext, but it's of course convenient, no end, to say, oh, we have to do it for the poor. In reality, we do it for the rich, of course. Well, today, the Sustainable Development Goals tend to be interpreted and used as the new growth dogma. The reason was that essentially the G77, the developing countries, were masterminding the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The question is whether this edifice of the Sustainable Development Goals is sustainable. The answer is no. 11 out of the 17 SDGs are aggressive growth imperatives, black color surrounded. And 3 are ecological. It's climate, oceans, and biodiversity. So it is better, instead of that kind of rectangle picture, to make a pyramid with the ecological goals at the basis of it all. Because once the ecological basis crashes, and it is about to crash, there won't be any well-being left. Of course, this will be denied because we need growth, growth, growth. This is the constant language by the G77. No question, you can't blame them because we have done that mishap before. But we must know that if growth means destruction of the basis, it is a huge mistake. But people prefer not to acknowledge that. Well, back to climate. Global warming goes on relentlessly. Around the world, we see wildfires, floods, now in Pakistan, as you know, dried harvests and hurricanes. But now comes something very, very uncomfortable and hard to digest. It's the fact that the GDP growth goes strictly with CO2 emissions growth. You know? Isn't that embarrassing? It is. In all 8 relevant economic sectors, you can have the countries of the world as little dots, and then if the contribution to the GDP is low, you are on the left-hand side. And the same if you emit low carbon dioxide. So, you see, if the family of countries has high GDP growth per person, it will have a lot of additional carbon dioxide. And that, of course, makes it understandable why people hate reduction of growth and reduction of CO2. Of course, their language is always, we want to reduce CO2. But in reality, CO2 emissions grow. That is what we want. Of course, we never say so. Meaning, we urgently need a decoupling of well-being, or of growth for that matter, from climate damages. Sort of beating those 8 square pictures which I've shown a moment ago. And we would have to do that worldwide. If we do that, we can win. If we don't, we are losing. However, German or Austrian greenhouse gas emissions combined make up for 2.5% of the world emissions. And 97.5% are emissions coming from somewhere else. So we in Austria and Germany are always quite proud and say, oh no, we do so little. Hence, domestic climate policy in Germany or Austria simply doesn't help much against global warming. So what can we then do? Well, of course, we are always proud saying it's relevant for the world if Austria and Germany demonstrate that extremely low carbon emissions and pleasant well-being are mutually compatible. This is exactly what Austria and Germany are doing. Okay, but it might not be enough. This is a cartoon of a family at the coast it was made in America, and the father or mother tell the boy, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. You know? That's, of course, complete rubbish. But such is our psychology. And there come COVID-30, there come COVID-19, there come economic crisis, and there come climate change, and biodiversity collapse is perhaps even worse. I mean, for re-establishing a healthy climate may take, I don't know what, 20,000 years or so, or perhaps a little more. But making biodiversity intact again could take millions of years, because extinguished species are not going to reappear. So that's the problem. The increase of world population makes it extremely difficult to stabilize climate and biodiversity. We have now reached roughly 8 billion, and it's still growing. In 1950, we were less than a third of what is coming. And between 1972 and today, we have had a doubling against all warnings. Let's now switch to a little more positive things. Together with an Australian team under Charlie Hargroves, who is now also a member of the Club of Rome, I wrote a book called Factor 5. It was actually the sequel of a book I did some 15 years earlier with Amory and Hunter Lovins, which was called Factor 4, Doubling Wealth, Halving Resource Use. And we are able to demonstrate that a 5-fold increase of energy and mineral productivity is technically feasible, meaning that it is technically possible to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other nasty things while having growing GDP. One example, very well known in Austria, is the so-called passive house, which essentially has a heat exchange ventilation, meaning that in cold winters, the used air from the living room travels through the building and thereby heats up the incoming fresh air, so that the fresh air enters the living room essentially at the temperature that was before. A fantastic invention, technological invention. Now, the question is if a factor of 5 is possible in terms of physics. If you tell this factor 5 any physicist, he will say, or she will say, no, no, no. We have done everything to maximize efficiency of energy, etc. It can't be more. Well, in order for you to understand what I'm saying, have a look at Mount Everest. And then imagine that bucket of water of 10 kilograms weight. And now you tell me, how many kilowatt hours would we need to lift that bucket of water to the top of Mount Everest from sea level? What's your guess? When I asked my students in California, for a while I was the dean of the Californian Graduate School of Environment, and so I was also teaching, and asked exactly this question. And the answer by the Californians was always anything between 1,000 kilowatt hours and perhaps 10,000. And I always said, wrong, 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 wrong. If I'm asking the students of Freiburg University, where I'm now teaching, I get more modest answers, like between 100 and 1,000 kilowatt hours. Also, that is completely wrong. The real answer is 1/4 of a kilowatt hour will do the trick. Isn't that fantastic? A kilowatt hour is a powerhouse with which we can do lots of things, but we waste it no end because it is cheap. 200 years were spent, and always, every decade, the prices of energy and material resources went down and down and down and down and down. That's the reality. And this is what we called technological progress. Progress means everything has to be cheap, so you can really squander it, which people do. But now, with the crisis triggered by the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the prices went up. And so all of a sudden, people, be it customers, users, or producers, are keen to have more efficiency. Everybody has it now in the language. So that also means it would have been better if energy and raw materials had held at this very high level of price. Then we wouldn't have a problem. The factor 5 would be ridiculously easy. A new fascinating topic for climate policy is photovoltaics. Some 40 years ago, photovoltaic electricity was extremely expensive. Some 300 times more expensive than what we pay now for a photovoltaic electricity kilowatt hour. Isn't that fantastic? A 300-fold decrease, meaning what was correct during the oil crisis, when everybody was scared by the blackmail from the OPEC countries, then it was very, very difficult, and people began to understand maybe we need electricity from the sun, but it was inordinately expensive. Okay. I was member of parliament in Germany when we initiated the sustainable energy law, and it did indeed make it much cheaper year by year by year to produce the photovoltaic electricity. Nowadays, during the time of our adopting the law, the price of a kilowatt hour photovoltaics was roughly €1. And now today, it's 1/20th of that, 5 euro cents. Isn't that fantastic? And if you go to places like Algeria or so, it is only 1 euro cent for 1 kilowatt hour. This is a fantastic improvement. So that could change the talk about climate-neutral cars. Presently, people always say, you have to switch from your dirty internal combustion car to electric cars or hydrogen fuel cars. The trouble is that on this planet we currently have some 1.1 billion internal combustion cars running on our streets. And now you guess how many of the owners of a functioning internal combustion car would be willing to scrap their cars and buy instead a new electric car. Well, my extremely optimistic guess is 15%. And 85% will not do that. So not much help is coming for climate. Hence, we absolutely also need the climate-neutral internal combustion car. This, of course, our European journalists would never accept. They say internal combustion cars are defined by being dirty and bad for climate, period. That's the end of the story. But in reality, climate-neutral combustion cars are possible. What you have to do is let that cheap PV power split water, the water molecule H2O, into oxygen, which is then in the air, which is fine, and hydrogen. And then let that hydrogen, the green hydrogen, merge, or marry if you wish, with CO2. What do you get? Methanol. And methanol is a wonderful, petrol substitute. You can drive your internal combustion car with methanol. Actually, the Chinese do that, not with a view of helping climate, but exclusively with a view of having less costs of imported oil. But at least they demonstrate it's possible. I say that all countries should help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That was this graph with Austria and Germany having only 2.5% of the emissions, unless we manage to get the developing countries into climate protection. We are losing the game. So, what can we do to get the developing countries on board? For that, I believe the best strategy is the so-called budget approach developed by a Council for Global Environmental Change in Germany. And the idea is that all countries of the world will have, at the initiative, exactly the same license or permit of burning fossils and emitting carbon dioxide, but the old industrialized countries, including Austria and Germany, have already more or less eaten up their licenses. So if we want to continue burning fossil fuels, we would have to go to the developing countries, that's the green line here, country group 3, and ask for a few additional licenses. That could persuade the developing countries to start climate protection. This is the Minister of Economics in India, Sri Piyush Goyal. He is currently, I believe, the most aggressive demander or legitimator for additional coal power plants. Because under today's conditions, a new coal power plant is as good as printing money. It makes you rich, and therefore he does it no end. But when the Europeans and perhaps North Americans and Japanese come to him and say, look, we need a few additional permits. Could you sell us some? He would come up with a high price and say, well, as a matter of fact, we would get richer by stopping this avalanche of new coal power plants and instead get that money from the bloody Germans. That would make us richer. And if that is the case, we are winning the game. If we don't, we are losing the game. Also in Africa, enjoying the cheap PV power, climate policy would become profitable. So that, I believe, is the core of the policy we have to adopt. I wrote a book which in German is called So reicht das nicht. It has not been translated into English, in which I more or less expand on what I have said in a few minutes. Let me go now a little bit deeper and look at the downsides of what we now call the Anthropocene. The term was invented by Paul Crutzen, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. He knew perfectly well that current climate change was the result of human action, notably burning fossil fuels, and that is destroying our planet. The gray zone on this picture is coal, the blue is oil, the red is natural gas. So, over the last 100 years or so, this exploded and created the climate problem. Of course, a good chemist would know that. The Anthropocene can mean humans are simply mad. You know? They quarrel all the time. And there is a psychologist or politician, if you wish, Susan Prescott, who says the Anthropocene syndrome is a complex of environmental degradation and increasing incivility in public and professional discourse. It should be replaced by symbiocene. But that would mean a totally different civilization. Some 150 years ago, that syndrome to which she referred was declared as a law of nature. It was Herbert Spencer, friend of Charles Darwin. He called it social Darwinism. He was an awful guy. He said, the state should not support the weak ones. Evolution would eradicate them, extinguish them anyway, which is good for a healthy humanity, and evolution makes the state superfluous. It can be done away. This is Herbert Spencer. You know now why I call him an awful guy. And Spencer was the precursor of radical neoliberals. Let the state aside and let the competition economy do the tricks. In 2018, Anders Wickman and I, we were the co-presidents of the Club of Rome still, at the 50th anniversary of the Club of Rome, published a rather radical new report. It was as far as asking a new enlightenment. It has got three portions. The first is, come on, don't tell me the current trends are sustainable. They are not. And part two is, come on, don't stick to outdated philosophies because they are stupid. They are over. And the third is, come on, join us on an exciting journey towards a sustainable world. As you know, in the English language, come on has two quite different meanings. Anyway, it meant also to overcome the brutal follies of Herbert Spencer and of the neoliberal economy. The German tradition was explicitly said, we need a new enlightenment. Okay, now, what Till was kind enough briefly explaining is that new book, Earth4All, which in some sense is more radical than Come On, but perhaps less popular. Here are three of the major contributors. I saw them all in Berlin a couple of days ago when the whole thing was presented. And it even got the German TV, the the daily, was heißt es nochmal? Tagesschau. Okay. One statement from Earth4All: the dominant economic model is destabilizing societies and the planet. It is time for change. It's more or less the same story that I said in negative terms with Herbert Spencer. The German edition has just been published. Till was kind enough showing the cover. And one idea of bringing things together is having four intertwined global crises, like the COVID-19, the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine, and the ecological crisis. And then the book says there are two alternatives, two scenarios. And one is too little, too late, which is what we currently do. This justifies the title of my German book. It's just too weak. Or the Great Leap. And this will be very, very ambitious. Till has also shown this picture. And it entails key recommendations globally. The world needs those 5 extraordinary turnarounds to reverse the trend in declining well-being and to remain within planetary boundaries. This is one of the 5 examples, in a way, food and nutrition. And it is a principle for a new era in food production in the Anthropocene. No more land expansion for the food. Farms must become stores of carbon. This is actually quite plausible. Farms must enhance the rich diversity of life, restore our soils to good health. The soils are very, very important. Manage our oceans and freshwater resources for resilience, and support more of the production locally for local consumption wherever possible. So that's a great proposal for a better kind of agriculture. Today's agriculture lobby does specifically the wrong thing. It's actually better in Oberösterreich, but in Germany, it's a horror. If you like, I can use some 6 more minutes for the idea of the new enlightenment. Well, I seem to see we have no time left.
Please, go on.
Yeah, okay. Well, this is the old enlightenment, which took place during what we call the empty world, when we were perhaps 500 million people. Now it's 8 full million. I don't go into details. But that enlightenment allowed for a spectacular growth of economic turnover. You know, until roughly 1800, there was no per capita growth of well-being, of economic well-being. And from there on, it went up like a rocket, and leading into the full world of today. When looking at the new Enlightenment idea, we were carefully reading the courageous encyclical of Pope Francis, in which he says that the current economy of greed, relentless competition, and wild acceleration is destroying our common home. Brave Pope. Balance must be it's the virtue of justice and stands at the core of a new enlightenment. Yeah, no, it's a cartoon, but nevertheless, you see what I mean. Heart and brain should be in some kind of balance. But in Western cultures, we tend to dogmatize. Only one is right and never a balance. No. In many Asian countries, balance symbolizes wisdom and wholeness. You all know the yin and yang symbol. And in sub-Saharan Africa, the good philosophy is called Ubuntu, essentially meaning, I am what you are thinking of me. So it's the opposite of egotism, of selfishness. Now, a few examples, I'm running through them. Balance between humans and nature. Presently, we do the opposite. Balance between short-term and long-term. If you are hungry, you better now eat now, not 30 years from now. You would be starved. But both have to cooperate. Balance between state and markets. If you look into Adam Smith, you will immediately notice that the geographical reach of the state and the geographical reach of the market, he called it the invisible hand, were identical. And then it was balanced. But today, the market is global and the law is national. So, small wonder that the law has become very weak. You know that? He's a lawyer, you know. And then, evidently, the state and religion. I believe not too many people in this room want the Islamic State, or the Christian state before Luther, etc., was also very problematic. But a state forbidding religions is equally stupid. Or balance between economic equity and incentives for achievement. This is a typical quarrel between the political left and the political right. The left says balance economic equity, and the right side, but there is nothing to distribute if there is no interest in doing more, you know? But if there is a balance, we are fine. Or balance between innovation. In America now they always say disruptive innovation and customary tradition. Both is needed, absolutely needed. These were 6 out of 100 proposals for good balance. I hope this will help thinking about human ecology, human way of life under the conditions of I keep forgetting the Johann Rockström.
Planetary boundaries.
Yeah, the boundaries. So, this is all, and I thank you for your fabulous patience.
Thank you so much. Down, please, yes. Thank you so much for this really inspiring insight into what actually would be needed to be done in the world, especially in our economy. We're now planning for a panel discussion. And as already described, it's about Earth4All, about the report that we have heard in parts already, focusing on the 5 important topics seeking to operationalize system change. 5 topics, it's energy transformation, food system transformation, widespread adoption of new economic models in developing countries or economies, reduced inequality to at least achieve a goal of ensuring the wealthiest 10% of the global population have less than 40% of the global wealth, and 5, empower women and invest in education for all. For this panel, I will introduce now the moderator to you. The moderator of this panel is going to be Friedrich Hinterberger. Please join on stage. Friedrich Hinterberger is an economist working on society and environment for more than 40 years now. Your focus is to provide positive messages on how sustainable development can boost well-being and quality for life for all on our planet while respecting the natural boundaries, as well as the fair distribution of wealth and well-being across the earth. And a quote, "Together we can achieve this if we think within and beyond available boxes, including scientific as well as artistic approaches, as well as everyday knowledge of everybody." Welcome, Friedrich Hinterberger, sorry.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and this allows me to introduce my co-panelists. One should be on screen. It's Jayati Ghosh from India. She saved us a lot of CO2 emissions. And the other 2 are Maria Langslehner from Umweltdachverband and where you want, your first European Environmental Bureau, and Astrid Rössler, from you're a member of the European Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks also to you both, Ernst and Till, for setting the stage about which. And here we have Jayati. Thanks for joining us here. Can we hear you? Can we?
Yes, hello,
yes,
and it's a pleasure to be with you, even if only virtually.
Great, thank you very much for joining us. We heard, I just wanted to introduce this panel and say we heard this two wonderful presentations on what could be done, how it could go, many different perspectives. And in this panel, the way we designed it was that we have various levels of policies and activities. We have the global level, and this is represented by you, Jayati. We have the European level, which Maria will also refer to as also working for the European Environmental Bureau, and we have the Austrian level. So, and on all these levels, a whole lot of things have to be done, as we heard. And the question will be a bit, what could you do, or what would you suggest? What could you do yourselves? What are you doing, and what are you suggesting for all of us on these various levels? And as we agreed is that you, Jayati, will start. We will have brief introductions by our panelists, and well, before I give the word to you, I forgot to say a little bit. I'm here because I represent the Austrian chapter of the Club of Rome. The Austrian chapter of the Club of Rome is a membership organization here in Austria. It is formally and organizationally not connected with, we are an association by the Austrian law. It's not connected, but it's of course content-wise connected, and we try to apply what we get also from the Club of Rome. We try to apply this here in Austria, and if any one of you is interested working with us, joining us, please come to us later. There's also Martin Hoffmann, who is the General Secretary. There's Gertrude over here. So there are several of us. So this was my advertisement blog. Sorry, and now I give the word to you, Jayati.
Thank you so much. And I know that everyone here has heard some really exciting keynote presentations, and that the background has already been created. You all know about the 5 big turnarounds that are being proposed and how they are actually eminently doable. So I want to give a little bit of a perspective, if you like, from the Global South, and particularly in terms of how we need to change international institutions and the international architecture to make sure that these turnarounds happen. And finally, if you like, the bottom line is that inequality is at the heart of the problem. Inequality is the reason why we are heading towards humanitarian catastrophes and, frankly, a potential extinction of not just many species, but even of the planet. And we can address those inequalities. We can address them locally, nationally, regionally, but most of all, we have to address them globally, which means that all of us in our own countries have to demand of our states that they insist on a change in the international architecture. So what kind of changes do we demand? I know that there are many young people in the audience. I know that many of them are probably active. You're probably quite active in terms of demanding change and demanding something be done, whether it's Fridays for the Future or whatever. It's very important to realize that we have to make specific demands of our governments within the country, but also in the international fora. We have to demand, for example, an end to fossil fuel subsidies. The IMF is estimating nearly $6 trillion a year in fossil fuel subsidies, which is ridiculous, direct and indirect. We have to say, end them now. Use that money to actually provide green financing. We are pitiful in terms of providing climate finance. It's not a gift of the rich countries to the poor countries. It is essential global public investment to save the planet. So we need to make sure that all governments contribute, and those who can contribute more, which is really the rich countries, contribute proportionately more to a major global fund that ensures green investments wherever they're required and in whichever ways they're required. We have to make sure that they provide for loss and damage because of climate change, and for all the mitigation and adaptation efforts, because we know that climate change adaptation is critical now. We know that changing global food systems, you heard about how essential that is, but it's going to cost money. And that money is available. We know that advanced economies, they can pull money out of a hat when they want, right? We saw that during the COVID pandemic. That money has to be directed towards saving the planet, but also ensuring the reduction or elimination of poverty and the massive reduction of inequality. So many, many things. We need a global tax deal that will enable countries to tax the very rich. I'm not even talking about the top 10%. Just tax the top 1% or the top 0.1%. If you actually tax the wealth of the top 0.1% of the world, just let's say 4%, so small they wouldn't even notice it, you would have enough to finance the energy turnaround globally. We are talking about unbelievable inequalities that can be changed. And so we have to demand much more taxation of the rich, much more taxation of multinational corporations to fund the transitions that we know are so essential. We have to demand regulation of large capital, which is currently undermining all the efforts that we have to move towards a green transition. Partly it is subsidies for fossil fuels, but it's also the profit-seeking motives of private companies. You can't blame them. That's what they're there for. But we have to regulate them so that they don't add to the problem. At the moment, in fact, we are adding to that problem every day. We are making things worse. We are making the climate hotter. We are making our food systems more unsustainable. We are destroying the environment. We are ecologically disastrous. We are undermining many, many other species in nature. So all of these things are because we are letting it happen. So we really need a combination of carrots and sticks, incentives, yes, but also regulation. Prevent the bad stuff from happening. If the large financial institutions in the world, let's say BlackRock or these others, if they're spending $100, let's say, I mean, at the moment it's trillions of dollars, but let's say for every $100 they give to brown finance, to coal, to fossil fuels, etc., let's say, well, then you have to give $500 for green financing, for the just energy transition. We can do this. It really just requires political will. Unfortunately, the large corporations that are doing this damage have got tremendous lobbying power, and they are able to make governments do the policies that they want. We need a citizens' movement to change that. We need a citizens' movement to make governments feel they have no choice but to respond, because the problem is urgent. The problem, it's so large that people often think, oh my God, there's nothing we can do. But I'm sure, as you have seen from these papers and from these presentations, these are doable. These can be done. We just need the political will, and we need it urgently. We need it now. So all of you young people, all of you concerned citizens, all of you artists, think of the different ways in which you can raise consciousness among people about this, about how pressing the problem is and how disastrous the consequences will be if we just continue as business as usual. Think of, spread the word about how, in fact, all of these changes are doable. It's really power that is preventing us. It's the power of large corporations and their lobbying abilities. We have to confront that with people power. And that means that we have to make more and more people aware. That's where all of you young people, all of you creative people have this huge role to play. I can say much more, but I will wait for questions, and I'm sure there will be many. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will definitely come back to this global view. But before that, I would like to give the floor to the European perspective by Maria Langslehner. And you're welcome to say a few words about yourself and what you're working on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Langslehner. I work for the Umweltdachverband in Vienna. Umweltdachverband is an environmental umbrella organization that represents more than 30 environment and nature conservation organizations. So our main field of work is environmental policy, both at EU level but also on national level. And my focus is on economic transition. So I was trained in socio-ecological economics. So in my work, I try to think of the social, ecological, and economic sphere together. So basically, I see the environmental problems as rooted in the current socio-economic system, how it works. So that's why we, I mean, in the keynote, we have heard that this economic model is highly problematic for social and environmental reasons. I think I don't need to explain that anymore after this inspiring keynote. But what we do, especially together with our umbrella organization in Brussels, so that's our partner organization, the European Environmental Bureau, we started a few years ago to increasingly look into the systemic issues of environmental problems, which I have just said is that growth-oriented economic model. So now we are trying to bring the economic topic also in our organization, but also demand political change, both on EU level and also on national level. So in our advocacy work around systemic change, we increasingly use the concept of the well-being economy. So it has somehow become established in the European discussion, not only amongst civil society organizations, but also on the political level. Because the European Union itself committed to shift towards a well-being economy, and also other governments did already. And I will talk about these developments in a minute, but first of all, just briefly, what do we mean by well-being economy? So for us, it's a vision of an economy that is structured in a way that it serves the well-being of people and planet alike. So it's about an economy that delivers social justice and respects planetary boundaries. Also, for us, it's an umbrella term for all growth growth alternative models. And one important strand within the whole debate is the beyond GDP debate, meaning that economic success should no longer be measured by one indicator alone. And there are five basic needs that need to be met in a well-being economy. This is dignity, nature, connection, fairness, and participation. And because we also work on circular economy, we advocate for a sufficiency-based circular economy, because we need to address the consumption side, not only production side. We also need to address the consumption side. We need to consume less and differently. So now to the developments on the European level. So we have seen that networks and alliances have emerged in Europe and beyond. And one important stakeholder in this regard is the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. That's a global movement with more than, I think, 200 members, including the Economy for the Common Good, for example, then Donut Economics Action Lab, or also our umbrella organization in Brussels. And they want to create a momentum for economic transformation. And what is particularly interesting to us is that this alliance also instigated the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership. So here the governments are included in this whole debate, which is very interesting, because this partnership is a collaboration of national and regional governments. Currently there are 5. It's New Zealand, Scotland, Iceland, Wales, and Finland, and they all agreed to align their policies and budgets with the concept of the well-being economy. I just want to give 2 examples. New Zealand, for example, they introduced a well-being budget and the living standards framework. The living standards framework, for example, is a dashboard of indicators, so they don't only report on the financial and fiscal development, but they include social and ecological indicators as well. And another interesting example is also the Wellbeing of Future Generation Act that was adopted in Wales. And so they put the importance of well-being into law. And I find this is quite a unique piece of legislation, because with this act, they protect the interests of future generations. And besides those examples of governments, there is also the European Union agreed to shift towards a well-being economy, namely in the 8th Environment Action Programme. The Environment Action Programme is a 10-year plan from 2020 to 2030. and it's binding to all three institutions, to the European Commission, to the Parliament, and to the Council. So it means also to the member states. And this is quite important because it was for the first time that all three institutions agreed on this program. The 7 environment action programs before were just like messages, or it was just done by the Commission. But this time it's also it was also agreed by all three institutions. And what did they agree on? They agreed to advance towards a well-being economy and to provide a dashboard of indicators. With dashboard of indicators, I mean to go beyond GDP, basically. And at the moment, the European Commission already works on a well-being economy framework, and probably next year there will be first results. They also consulted stakeholders, so our partner organization in Brussels was involved into these debates. My first input was just to give some example what's going on, and I think there are interesting developments going on at European level and also in other countries. I mean, if my example with the well-being economy government partnership is quite interesting. We hope that we will be able in Austria to initiate similar discussions on the well-being economy, and also ideally to convince our government to join such a partnership, because as we've heard, everyone is responsible to do something, and the political level as well.
Thank you very much. We heard that there is a lot going on, will be in Europe, and I'm sure there's a lot still to be done. We'll come back to that. I may say that I had a chance to look at the report Earth4All already, and there is a strong reference to the well-being economy also made. The good thing, and also a bit of a pity, is it's already sold out. It came out on Monday, and it's not available anymore. I think Martin got the last copy here in the bookshop, but I'm sure there is more on the way. And there is also an ebook, of course, and you can look at this. Astrid, now coming to the Austrian level, and you also worked on the regional level. So I'm eager to hear what your contribution could be.
Thank you, Fritz. Hello and good afternoon. So I think my part is the most difficult one now, for I'm a politician, and I'm the one responsible if the science's results are turned into reality. So my name is Astrid Rössler. Right now I'm an environmental speaker in the National Parliament, and as Fritz mentioned, I worked on the province level for a few years, so I'm in politics just for maybe 12, 14 years, which is not that long. And before that, I worked for decades on the environmental topics, for environmental law and participation, and mainly on environmental conflict resolutions. For I always suffered. I suffered a lot for the environmental conflicts that were solved with kind of laws, and I felt that the laws did not give the best solution for the environment, nor for the people involved. And right now in the parliament, the Green Party is part of the government, so it's more or less my duty or my role to put into action and put in legal proceedings and turn what's necessary to be done for sustainability, which is not that easy, not in these times, and I think it's never been easy before to have a strong position for environment and participation of people and climate goals. I think we are even getting far away from what's needed to be done. But nevertheless, I would like to describe what I think might be the next step to improve that democratic tools to turn into reality what has to be done. And democracy, I think, is a bit too slow to get a good management for the crisis. It's a multiple crisis right now. It's a climate crisis, biodiversity loss, it's energy, it's peace, it's inequality. Jayati, I fully agree what you said before, I fully agree. I teach international students in sustainable tourism, so I really know about many countries, the problems of sustainability in tourism. And the democratic paths for solutions, we did a lot for transparent and participation within the legal procedures, but still it takes too much time. That's one thing. We could be faster, okay, but once you come into realization of, let's say, what has to be done to meet the climate goals, it's a problem of which interests are very strong in the final decisions. And this is not the common interest, the public common interest for a sustainable planet and for the survival of human mankind. I don't want to talk about just the Austrian focus. It's a global question. And how to improve the political and the legal procedures to get a stronger position for the common public interests and not for the interests of smaller groups and interests and single issues that are represented, I think, and I realize it's too strong. We need to have a public interest, a strong public interest. And I would like to turn it in stronger words. We're talking a lot about human rights, and that was important for the past 50, 100 years and more. But I think now, today, we have to talk about human duties. Human duties to work hard to save the planet. We need a definition. What's a duty of being a human for the next generation? It's not enough to talk about freedom. Freedom is used by those people who want to get the most money and the most income for their own profits. But we need, what's their duty? To contribute to a planet that is worth living all over the globe, not just in Europe. And I agree, it's more duty on high-level educated and high-level income and well-being countries like European countries, like Austria, like Germany, and so on, to contribute to a bigger share for the well-being of the world, to spend more in cooperation with the global south, to spend much more on knowledge, technology, and climate action in other countries. So this is what I'm thinking about. Sometimes I'm worried, but I would never give up, not a clue of giving up. I think it's such an important time right now. It's a lot of very important decisions to be done, and I'm happy about all the support that helps me to have that role in Parliament and to fight for a safer environment and to have a good future for next generations.
Thank you. Thank you. Now that I listen to all three of you, I think we have a full circle now in a way. And you all talked about conflicts, you talked about the power. And I want to come back to you, Jayati. You said a lot of, we know this and that, the many things that need to be done, and this is true since the first report to the Club of Rome. And I think a lot has been done since then. But then you said it's the power that is against it. When I started to read the new report, I thought maybe that you bring the inequality question and the poverty question so up front. That could be to try to overcome this somehow. And then I found on the website and in both slides of both Ernst and Till, it was showed also, there is this button, join us. So my question to you as also an author, co-author of the report, what can we expect when we push this button, join us, and what can we actually do together with you and to overcome this power thing?
You know, that's such a good question. And I really hope that all of you in the audience and all of us can actually join together to respond. So if you press this button, you will know what exactly can change and what could be done in your country, in your region, or even globally. How much would change if, for example, we demand that the IMF releases much more of its liquidity, the special drawing rights, to make it available to poor countries. If we demand a proper resolution of debt of the poor countries, what would happen? Who would gain? How would people in the poor countries be able to meet their basic needs? How would that prevent the inability now of most developing countries to actually make the kinds of transitions and changes that we need? If we press on other buttons, we can find out what role is being played by the control over knowledge and intellectual property rights, which are being enforced not in people's interest, not in the interests of anybody in the world in terms of ordinary people, but only in the interests of large corporations. And we can see how much difference would be made if we actually got rid of those intellectual property rights for critical areas in public health, of course, but in all of the elements of the green transition or all of the technology that we need to make sure that humanity can confront this challenge. Once we know these things, we can go out there and talk about it, disseminate, make more people aware. You know, it's not that governments are bad. Governments respond to the pressures they face. And right now they're facing pressures from big corporations who are interested in their own short-term profitability. We have to make them feel the pressure that is coming from nature, from the planet, and from all of us. In other words, we have to generate sufficient pressure that governments bring in the kinds of changes that are required. In terms of de-recognizing a lot of the monopolies over knowledge, in terms of reducing the subsidies on fossil fuels, in terms of enabling greater taxation of the wealthy and of large corporations, in terms of regulating finance and ensuring that money goes to the sectors that we need. It can be done, but it really means we have to have a big popular movement. So that's why I keep saying this. You know, the book is a fabulous. I think it's a tremendous piece of work, of collective work done by scientists and economists and others. But it's also a call to action, and so it's very important for each one of us in our own ways to try and spread this message and make sure enough people know about it that governments are forced to respond.
Thanks a lot, and we'll definitely come back to that. I again want to turn to you, Maria. You told us about the 5 good ones, the Scotland and so countries that really do something: New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, Iceland, Finland. They are doing this for a couple of years, I guess, or months or years. So it's quite a new movement, but already working, as you explained to us. Can you already see what they are? Are they facing the powers also of the negative powers, or are there also powers that work against that, or is it so that they can really be that we can really follow them and they find a lot of followers beyond the NGOs that, of course, like that?
Well, actually, I don't know that much about this partnership in detail because it's quite it's not so transparent. They have these informal meetings where they share expertise and best practices. So it's more like a partnership where they are sharing which policy work, which not. And I mean, New Zealand, for example, with their well-being budget and their living standards framework, I mean, they also have not overcome social inequality, and so they have started. But I think it's important to have this message that do you go beyond GDP to put well-being in the center, because we need a new paradigm. And at the moment, it's all about economic growth. And when I put well-being in the center and inform my citizens about it, it can create a different dynamic. And I mean, none of these countries claim that they have achieved a well-being economy. By far not. But I think it's important to have a strategy, to have this vision, to tell it to the people, and because it shows that it's the government that wants to shift. And I think in Austria, for example, we lack such a discussion on transformation. I mean, actually, we would need a Ministry of Economic Transition and these kind of things. And in other countries, there is, I feel, a bit more going on because we need to get over this. I mean, we have all topics are interlinked and interdependent. So this also needs to be represented on the government level. I feel like everyone works in their ministry and in their field. However, we need this holistic perspective and to make policies according to these interlinkages.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And before we will, in a minute, open up to the audience to enable you to pose questions to all of the panelists, I would like to ask you, Astrid, about, we saw, I think it was mentioned that a vast majority of the, I think, industrialized countries would favor such a shift in the economy, or exactly what also you were presenting. Why do politicians not see that? They would get a lot of voters if they would make these turnarounds, or where is the problem?
So these are two questions. First of all, are political representatives ready to see and act for a change? I think they are. They are more than we might suppose, but they might need some to be pushed a little bit, and there are good, I think, good examples that it's worth trying to get support from the citizens, like the climate change protests. They did a lot, they changed a lot, and they kind of encouraged all parties to do more for climate, to reach the climate goals. That was a push for climate action. And another example is to talk about food waste. There are kind many of private initiatives, and there is a demand to change that food waste. There is 1 million of food that is thrown away each year in Austria, and people are so fed up because of that. They want it changed. They don't want to continue. And the third example is the Citizens' Council, the Climate Citizens' Council, that were 100 people selected by chance, and they were joined for half a year, from January to June, July this year, and they spent 6 weekends and these were people from all ages, all kind of age, profession, regions, and they were very different. And that was a very good, a good try to find out, once if you join them on a certain question, like how to fight climate change, and you support these people with very good scientists, and you put them into teams. So they spent 6 weekends, and that changed completely. And it's worth reading the final report of that Klimarat. The final report, it's on the internet. And we were very, very curious, what are the suggestions? And they were very bold suggestions. So I think this is more than enough. It's a gift to politics to have results like this. For that, it's an empowerment for scientific-based political decisions. This is what we need, and I think it's kind of cooperation and supply and demand of information and empowerment that political decisions might change with more pressure from the civil groups and scientific. So we need both to improve these decisions and to be faster.
Okay, thank you very much. I see here on the clock we have more than 20 minutes to go in this panel. So I would like to open up and ask you here in the audience, do you have comments or especially questions to the panelists, maybe also to the authors of the report? Also, Ernst and Till are still here. So, who wants to start? Yes.
Hello. Hello, thank you very much. Very interesting. Not sure if you're aware, but in the UK there's a political movement that are aimed at holding our politicians accountable for inequality at the moment, called Enough is Enough. And at the same time, our new Prime Minister has just chosen to enable fracking again and subsidize the big oil companies. What would you say to people like me who've kind of lost hope? Because time and time again we see politicians cowering to the interests of shareholders and big companies over a vocal public who are looking for betterment in the environment and good things for people.
Okay, I suggest that we collect 2 or 3, so if there are other questions.
Thank you for your nice presentations. Maybe just to follow up what this gentleman from England said, even here in Linz, you know, there are lots of initiatives, public citizen initiatives who want to bring the traffic out of Linz, but our government here is bringing in even more traffic into the city. And all these initiatives, you know, we are like biting into concrete, nothing happens. So we have beautiful words and we all say we should. And then if the public initiatives are doing something, we are just, you know, being called silly or stupid and nothing happens. So it's very frustrating to be an activist, actually.
So maybe one more if there is. Yes, over there.
Thank you. I want to raise the first question to the level of less optimism even. So the last 2 years we've seen how little science is appreciated in the general opinion, and since democratic process relies on the majority of people and the majority being informed, why should we even believe that the democratic process would work if we have to reduce our way of living?
I think somehow the essence of all 3 questions was, why do you still have hope? And why are you doing this work, and with what kind of hope you are doing? I think you, Astrid, you said it explicitly that you are still hoping and working. So maybe you want to start? Please give us hope.
I didn't say that I still have a lot of hope. But I would say to give up is no option, no option at all. And yes, still I want to try and to fail and try again and try better. I'm experienced in a citizen initiative that was very frustrating to the woman up there. Though it might be frustrating, it still makes sense not to give up and to try again. So to give an example from my political experience, I am the person that did a speed limit to 80 kilometers per hour on the motorway in Salzburg. And you can imagine this is quite a hard job to decide a speed limit of 80, which is horrible for all the people on the motorway. And I did it not for traffic jam or whatever. I did it for the health, because the Stickoxide, nitrous oxides, which is it's unhealthy for your lung system and breathing system, and which is a bad thing. That was much too high, and I tried to explain. I said, please, people, listen. It's not. I don't dislike cars, but I dislike the health suffering of people, and there are too many people living left and right from the motorway. And that was an incredible shitstorm on Facebook and whatever you might imagine. And still, I suffered. I knew they won't vote me again. I knew, and it was a fact a few years later. But still, I knew it was important. It was for the health of people. I was convinced I did the right thing, and I was not in a bad feeling when I left due to a bad voting result. The election did not work. So you need to work with failures. It's part to save this planet, never to give up and try again and find another way to get a good. So it's no option. Please, it's no option.
So my impression is you do still have hope. If I interpret, we lost some 15 minutes now. It's now only 5 minutes. Is the clock now right? Yeah. So sorry for that. So we are more or less in the last round of your statement. So I would like to give the word to Maria. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, maybe to respond also to the questions in the audience. Actually, my presentation was meant to give you a bit hope, because I feel that there is something, well, always not enough, but there is something going on, especially on the European level, to create a new dynamic. And I also think, I've become an activist because this motivates me, and I think everyone can choose what one does for a living and spend your leisure and I don't know. I also think giving up is never an option. So, but I can imagine that it is hard, especially for the younger generation. I just basically want to make one announcement. So in May next year there will be a Beyond Growth conference in the European Parliament, and it's supported by many political parties, and I think that's a great sign that we have such a debate in such an important institution. And also, again, another final word, I have issued this magazine on the well-being economy, so I have a few copies here. If you're interested, you can come to me later. That's, I think.
Thank you. Jayati, please. No, we don't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no.
I really appreciate the frustration and the exhaustion of all of you activists. I think all of us have felt this, that, oh my God, we do this, and then governments come and do exactly the opposite. And yes, it is, because the powers, as we've all talked about, the powers that can impact the state are the ones that are pushing for more destructive economic and other policies. So I suppose at one level it's a question of, can humanity step back from the brink? And I really fundamentally do believe we can. Otherwise, frankly, we should all just be going home to bed and waiting for the end. So I do believe humanity can step back from the brink. I think their changes have occurred, not as much as we want, obviously, far too slow. Many more bad things are happening than good things. But 5 years ago, if you had told me the IMF would come out with a statement about the extent of those fossil fuel subsidies and say something has to be done about it. If you had told me 8 countries in the world are adopting well-being indicators as the basis for their economic policy, if you had told me that more and more countries are demanding, even in the international fora, that we have to go beyond GDP, and that the UN itself is taking this up on a very systematic level, saying we're not going to look at GDP as the only indicator, we're going to look at ecological, employment, and human welfare indicators instead. These are big changes, and they have the potential to shift policy. Having said that, yes, it's deeply frustrating. And governments are short-term, governments are subservient to large capital. We have to keep that noise going. And that noise has an impact. It doesn't always appear, but let's say in the UK, if Liz Truss can just get away with this complete reversal, that's a problem. There has to be much more noise in the UK as well. Instead of a kind of fatalistic, oh my God, that's what they're going to do because it's a Conservative Party that has this instinct. There has to be pushback. Big capital is very good at pushback. We have to get very good at pushback. And I think people pushback can make a difference. It's already changed a lot of the discussion. I would also implore all of you in Austria, in Europe, please don't just think of your local and national. Please think of how to change the international, because these environmental and climate changes don't just impact one country. They don't respect borders and visas and passports. They are going to impact everyone. So unless we do something for the rest of the world, unless we provide the climate finance and make those other global changes, it won't matter what you do within your own country. So we really have to think globally and push our governments to think globally as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, here you are again. Thank you very much also that you reminded us on the successes. I think we should also celebrate the successes, not only be frustrated, which I think is fair enough, as you said. And I think what motivates, and this is not my last, what motivates me a lot with the new report is that we are not alone in the sense we are not just environmentalists. So the 5 challenges here is also there are 4 more movements that are dealing with the poverty, with the inequalities, with the gender issues, and we should do this together, and then we are more, and that maybe helps us in achieving some of our goals, and the fights will go on. So thank you very much for joining this panel, you the panelists, you the audience. Thanks to India, and I wish you a fruitful further conference or festival here in this wonderful universities where, by the way, I studied here in the last century. Thank you.